Well, welcome to Politics Today. And in this program today, this is a continuation of last week's program because the issue of Jew hatred is so serious and Christians should actually respond to this shocking rise in Jew hatred. And that's why we are discussing this program again for 2 weeks in a row. So in this program today, I am joined again by Sharon Clough, and she represents the Campaign for Truth and is very active within her community, which is the Jewish community in North London, as well as Dave Burles from Halford House in Richmond. So welcome to the programme. I wanted to have two programmes attacking this issue, primarily because I think as Christians in this panel and Christian viewers watching this programme, Sharon, that we are concerned about this shocking rise of Jew hatred that we're seeing, particularly after Israel's self-defensive war against Hamas in Gaza back in May, that effectively had 11 days of military conflict with this globalist terrorist organization called Hamas. And sadly, even though the Jewish community is linked to Israel, the Jewish community here is not responsible for the actions of the Israeli government or actions of the Israeli state. And yet the new equation is the Jewish people to be blamed no matter what. And of course, then we've seen these horrific attacks against, not only against Israel, but against the Jewish people as well. And this is something that any decent society cannot tolerate. So from your perspective, how do you see this new anti-Semitism and attacks that are being driven at your community?
Okay, so every time there's a crisis in Israel, there's an increase in anti-Semitism. That's a given. I don't know if you remember 2014, it happened, and it's happened now. And in between, there's been a steady growth, as we discussed before, a steady growth of anti-Semitism. We of Campaign for Truth have always said our byline is anti-Semitism, anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism, and that is anti-Judaism. And so they're all one and the same thing. And what has happened in the past is that the anti-Semites have been successful in creating a division amongst the two, to say that there's a separation between anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism. Of course, anti-Zionism are people who are against Israel. And we know that people have an obsessive view of what happens in Israel, obsessive view of what happens with the Israeli government and how they run their government and how they treat their citizens, over and above any other country in the whole world. We know that. So, but what has happened now is that two things have come out because of what's going on with the Palestinianism that's rife on the streets, the Palestine brand, I call it. The one thing is it's proven now that anti-Zionism is just another word for anti-Semitism. There's no doubt about it. And this is why the Jews in this country are taking the flak for what's going on in Israel. There's no division between the Israeli government, by the way, which isn't solely a Jewish government. Of course, there are Muslims and Christians in that government, in that parliament. But there's no separation between what happens there, the attacks on Israel from Hamas, and what happens here amongst the Jewish community. The Jewish community are taking the flak for it. That's a QED of the slogan. So there is no doubt about the fact that Jews are going to continue to be attacked, and behind it is the ancient hatred of Jews. There's two elements to Jew hatred. The one is the ancient hatred, which is Christian-based. I grew up being told that I'd kill Jesus. I'm sure you've heard that. And the other one is Islamic-based. Now, the Christian-based anti-Semitism has largely morphed because it's had a reformation, and I think a lot of Christian people like yourselves have rethought that whole issue, and it's no longer an idea that the Jews killed Christ. There's a history there that people are beginning to look into and narrate to communities. Having said that, there are, of course, churches that are still entrenched in anti-Semitism. But the bigger anti-Semitism today is Islamic anti-Semitism. And I use the word Islamic and not Muslim because I don't talk about people. I'm talking about the ideology that is propagating anti-Semitism. And the reason that it's there is because nobody will speak out against it. So if you ask what the Christians can do They can stand up and talk about Islamic anti-Semitism.
And Dave, it's great to have you back on the programme as we discuss this very important issue. And sadly, if we look back at church history, we see that certainly through the kind of period of the early church onwards, we've seen that the church as large, particularly in Europe, has pretty much persecuted the Jewish people, particularly through the Middle Ages with the awful Crusades, and then followed on then by the Spanish Inquisition, and then of course. Luther himself wrote the book The Jews and Their Lies as well, that Hitler used as a justification for the Holocaust. So a lot of Christians and a lot of the church has played a shocking role in its relationship with the Jewish community across Europe. And as Sharon has said, that this is changed now, that one aspect of this is Islamic anti-Semitism, of course, then also the political left have adopted this hatred of Israel that also stems into anti-Semitism, and then now it's Israel's the wandering Jew among the nations, and Israel's being attacked on the international scene. So, as Christians, what should our response from a biblical position be to our friends like Sharon in the Jewish community?
Yeah, sadly, in one of these protests, again, the sign was held up about the Jews killing Jesus. And making this point even in a recent protest, and it's shameful. I mean, we as we understand it, the Bible is very clear. Jesus was Jewish. He was born in a Jewish town. The Bethlehem was Jewish at the time in Judea. What did that mean? It's because the Jews were there. So there was a lot of false narrative that still you read in commentaries and textbooks around Christianity that talk about the land of Palestine at Christ's time. It wasn't called Palestine at Christ's time. So there's so much that needs undoing. And sadly, we've done a lot better. We're not going in crusades anymore, killing Jews. That was a shocking and shameful thing and a shameful history. But we've still got a lot of work to do. And I don't think whilst those of us who support Israel and understand God's purposes for Israel, see it. There's a whole section of the church, particularly the established church, the Anglican church, the Methodist church, who still, because they're more aligned politically left, they rub shoulders with those who share this anti-Zionism, and they think it's acceptable. They think that's okay. They haven't left behind this Jew hatred. They're still there. It's still, it's taken a different form. It's this anti-Zionism. Guys, but the reality is that it's still within the Christian community. There are people who promote anti-Zionism, anti-Israel, and anti-Semitism. Stephen Sizer was a case in point. And it took the church ages to sort out Stephen Sizer. And still would be given a platform in churches today. It's a shameful part of our history, and this is modern history.
And Sharon, there's a great danger, isn't there, when we see these big pro-Palestinian demonstrations across West London, across central London, and we see the kind of rhetoric that goes unchallenged, such as Palestine will be free from the river to the sea. Effectively, what these supporters are saying is that Israel is between the west of the Jordan and east of the Jordan. So effectively, they're calling for genocide. So can't the police do more to stop these incitement to genocide? Because that's effectively what it is. And whether you like it or not, those that are caught up in the Palestinian cause and those who support Hamas are taking the position of an Islamist terrorist organization who's in their own covenant charter wants to destroy not only the state of Israel, which there's only one Jewish state, and that's the nation of Israel, but also to wipe out the entire Jewish people. And it could be written something from the book of Mein Kampf, from Hitler's own words. And so shouldn't the police and authorities and our government take rhetoric seriously? Because it starts with rhetoric, and then what we see then is it's followed by violence.
Absolutely. The police should take it seriously, but the police don't. These big protests were happening in 2011, 2012. The Mavi Mamare, do you remember that?
Oh, yes, yeah.
There were big protests. There were like 2,000 people outside the Israeli embassy. And I have to say, although they were rowdy, they weren't violent. They were rowdy. We were on that side, the 50 of us, and they were on that side, the 2,000 of them. Standing on the platform were people like Jeremy Corbyn and so on. So they're not new. And the rhetoric is not new. I remember being outside the embassy in 2012, and they were doing or shouting the Khyber Khyber Yayahud slogan, which is basically calling for the historical attack on the Jews of Khyber to be reenacted in a modern day. In other words, to get rid of the Jews, because the Khyber Jews were totally eradicated. So, and I remember going to the chief of police who was in charge of that rally and saying to him, why is he allowing them to say that? Do you understand what they're saying? And he said, no. And when I asked him, could we please help you and translate for you? He said, no, he wasn't interested. So here we go forward. We're now, 10 years later? And now it's just free on the streets. If you read the description of Khyber Yayahud on a website called the Imam Hussein channel, you will see that it's anti-Semitic, it's calling for death to all Jews, it's horrendous to read. So it's the Imam Hussein website, and just Google it, and Khyber Yayahud, and they'll explain the whole lot to you. So yes, the police should take a much firmer stand in it, but they don't. You saw the video of the protesters, I think you might have been to that protest, where they were walking through the streets with a policeman walking next to them. And they were saying, I'm looking for Jews, I need to find some Jews, I need to attack some Jews. And the policeman didn't lay a finger on them. He didn't even stop them saying it. So the police have a problem as much as the broader community. But if authority doesn't take a stand, what do we expect the school children to do? You know, they're going to go into school, they've heard the slogan, it's now everywhere, and they're having riots in schools now. Jewish kids don't feel welcome in schools.
And Dave, particularly after we look after the horrendous terrorist attacks that took place with the rise of ISIS in really 2015 in Paris, the attack on Charlie Hebdo, and then the attack on the Jewish kosher supermarket in Paris as well, we see that with Islamist terrorist attacks, they want to single out the kind of Jewish people. We saw the attack on the Jewish Museum as well in Brussels a year previously. But when we today see Jewish schools or Jewish synagogues, they need massive security. You go to a Jewish school now and it's barbed wire fencing taking place. Now, that is a good temporary measure to relay a lot of the fears that Sharon's echoed that her community faced with the rise of Jew hatred and the fear of violent attacks. But that's not a long-term solution, is it, to actually dealing with this problem? So don't the government need to determine that what their rhetoric and how they talk about Israel directly affects the many within the British Muslim community here and others on the far left, that they don't protect Israel that much within the international realm when they're defending themselves from these Hamas rockets and missiles? And then we find ourselves that, yes, we're against Israel, we're not going to defend Israel, but at the same time, we condemn anti-Semitism. Now, surely our government has got up a wrong jointed thinking that by confronting and standing with Israel means effectively we're dealing and confronting with Jew haters at the same time.
Yeah, I mean, we talked about we need to get our own house in order, but then we also need to speak to the reality that's on the ground. The reality on the ground is that anti-Semitism growth, the statistics are there, is coming from the Islamic community, is coming from Islamic teaching. We talked about the Khyber. There was a Labour MP, I've forgotten his name. He was addressing a rally, and they immediately after he finished, they chanted this Khyber Yayahud, which, as Sharon described to you, is completely anti-Semitic. This guy goes to enough Palestinian protests. He knows, the MP. He didn't do anything to try and silence it. We need to address the issue. But of course, political correctness has silenced this for too long. For too long, we've not been able to say, well, there's a real problem with the Islamic community and Islamic teaching that calls for the death of Jews. It's in the teaching, it's in the hadiths, It's ascribed there. Now, we might say, oh, we respect all faiths, and people can take that view. But there are things that are anti-Semitic. There are things that are wrong. There are things that are deeply distasteful. And we do have to speak out against it. Just because we know that they were in the minority and we don't want to see anyone feel empowered to attack Muslim communities and take the law into their own hands, we do need to speak out against things that are wrong. And while we've sat by and allowed this to happen because it's a minority community, because it's a group, and I think that those people marching alongside the police actually were doing it on purpose to say, you won't touch me. I can say whatever I like in front of you. And he knew he could get away with it because that's his lived experience. The police will not intervene when Muslims chant anti-Semitic rhetoric. And then they have to be followed up. And there's a campaign for against anti-Semitism that are going round. They take videos, they capture these images, and then they have to try and locate who it is. And of course, that's quite difficult after the event. But the police were there. The police heard the words. The police saw the signs. They didn't intervene. All that says to them is that this is acceptable. All that says to them is that you can get away with doing that on the streets of London. And all that says to everyone who looks on around is you can do that too. So we need to speak up. We need to raise our voice. And it's up to the Christians to speak up because we hopefully should be better informed about what the Islamic teaching is. And if we're not, then we need to be. And we need to be honest and we need to be frank about it.
Yeah. But isn't there a great danger, though, that sadly Jew hatred has gone mainstream? And I think that's evidenced by the rise of Jew hatred within the Labour Party and the Labour movement under the leadership of Jeremy Corbyn. And this poses toxic. We can look at isolated incidences. We can look at how this is having an impact or within some Islamic theology and teaching within the Muslim community in this country. We need to also look at how being anti-Israel has become the fashionable number one item on the international agenda of the hard left, and this is also becoming mainstream. And then, of course, we're also seeing a kind of semi-resurgence in neo-Nazism across Europe and also in Britain that also hold deeply anti-Semitic roots. So what I'm essentially saying, Sharon, isn't it, that those who take vile and evil positions at its heart is one of the hatred of the Jewish people. And whenever we see that, this is a danger to society at large.
I think what we're seeing here is the fact that society as a whole is in danger. It's in trouble, very big trouble. If we can see school children preaching hatred, jumping on desks, defying the authority of their teachers, if we can see a school teacher in hiding because he dared to teach the children something he thought they should be aware of, if we can watch that happening, if we can see a sector of society going to school behind barbed wire with security guards at the door, we have to address what's going on in our society. And in that sense, it's not just the Christians who need to do that. The Jews need to do that as well. The Muslims need to do that. They need to ask questions. Why are we seeing this and how can we fix it? If we allow preachers of hate, preachers from the Islamic community, preachers from the Christian community, and I'm not saying preachers from the Jewish community because the Jewish community doesn't preach in that sense, but there are Jewish people in the Jewish community who support this base, who support Jeremy Corbyn, for instance, who work on interfaith to the exclusion of working on anti-Semitism against Jews, who say that an anti-Semitic attack is an attack on all ethnicities, which it's not. We need to look at that and we need to try and fix that. How we do it, I don't know, because it's a huge problem. We have in the schools the whole idea of critical race, of anti-racism. And anti-racism itself, in essence, is racist. Anti-racism is apartheid. It's segregation by color. And so what we find is that Jews have been blanched. Jews are white. And therefore, in the eyes of the critical race thinkers, Jews cannot experience anti-Semitism. So it's not a problem for them. They don't recognize it. So there's a whole bank shoot of things that we need to address, not just the fact that Jews are feeling vulnerable, but why are they feeling vulnerable, who's making them feel vulnerable, and what can the broader society do to fix the trouble that the whole of society is in? How can we do that?
Yeah, Dave, that's a very important question. I think we all need to ask is what role can Christians play in confronting this rise in Jew hatred and making our friends like Sharon feel safer and more reassured, because there is no doubt that we are living in a climate of Jew hatred, not only here, but also across Europe and also across the United States as well. And if this is not confronted, then this is going to get a handle and spread like wildfire. And we know the end result, because you only have to look at history to know that this will bring God's judgment upon our nations and upon the nations in the West, and and our society will ultimately be worse off for it. Yeah,
we have to speak out. There are platforms afforded to us in this generation that weren't afforded to us previously. Previously, if you cared about something, you could go on a march. You still might not get, if the media didn't report on it, you still wouldn't be heard. But we have social media now. People have a voice. People have a platform where they can voice the utter disgust of what's going on. And I think we're required to. I think we're required to make our voices heard. I think God holds us accountable. He talks about, not being silent when we see these things taking place. That when we are silent, that we're almost culpable. And we talked a bit about the critical race theory, some of these ideas that are floating around in school. There's an element of political correctness that silences us from saying, well, we can't deal with these issues. But then, so we leave one minority oppressed to look after another. That's not protecting everyone. And again around this issue, because there's been a conflict, every time they say, this can't be a temporary solution. We need to solve the Israel problem. They talk about it again and again. How are they going to solve the Israel problem? What is the answer to solving the Israel problem? The answer is the removal of Israel. That's the only way they'll solve this conflict. Of course, they don't acknowledge that. But the only way for the Islamic nations around, particularly Hezbollah in the north, and in Gaza and Hamas and the PLO, they want the removal of Israel. Then there'll be peace. But there won't be peace unless you remove Israel. Of course, no one's acknowledging that in the nations, and no one's acknowledging the fact that they keep talking about finding a solution, but there is no solution unless you throw the Jews under the bus. We can't do it. We need to speak up against why this conflict is taking place and why it's being perpetuated, because people are taught to hate. People are taught to hate Jews, and they're taught to hate Jews in this country, they're taught to hate Jews around the world, and they're certainly taught to hate Jews in Gaza.
And Sharon, what would you like to see the Christian community do in terms of showing solidarity and support with your beleaguered community in confronting Jew hatred?
Well, I think there's a bit of a burden on our Christian friends, because you're not a big group of people, but you have a powerful message. And the first thing I'd like to see perhaps is for you to go to the mainstream church leaders and educate them, get them to speak up. And I see you smiling.
Yeah.
I know.
We're in a minority as well, you see.
Yeah, you're in the same minority that I'm in my community. So it's very difficult. But I think there has to be an attempt to do that. There has to be some leader in your community that can actually make some inroads into the mainstream churches. I think education in the schools, but how do we break the entrenchment now of reversing history, of the pulling down of statues? However vile the past might have been, the past is our history. And if we take away the history, we don't have a future. So it's a very big job. The Christian community can firstly educate itself on Israel. I know that you leaders are very well educated on Israel, so there's an education, there's an output perhaps of books and pamphlets and stuff to educate them on, to bring back the study of the Bible, because the Bible will give them enough about Israel.
Yeah, because it runs right through the start of the book all the way through the end of the book.
Yeah, and the Bible is important. The Bible has been taken out of education. And I know, for instance, I went to a meeting at City Hall, and when Preacher Alu was arrested, and so I think it was David Curtin asked Sadiq Khan about something in the Bible, and he said he hadn't read it. Now, he lives in the UK, he's born in the UK, he's been to school in a country where the head of state is head of the church, and he's never read the Bible. Now, I don't expect him to read it at home. He's got his community at home. I expect his teachers to have taught him, like I was taught the Bible. I was also taught the Christian Bible at school. So I think if we go back to that basis and try and bring the stories of the Bible back, not to make everybody be extremely religious, but to understand that there's a history there that they need to walk forward with.
Yeah. And Dave, a minute and a half of the programme left. So we need to kind of bring the programme to a close. So my kind of response to you is, as the Christian community and those that support Israel and the Jewish people, are we doing enough?
There's never enough. And we're not going to see this end. We believe that we're not going to see it end until the Lord returns. But until he comes, we need to raise our voice. We need to keep speaking up. We do need to educate. We have the word of God. We believe it's true. We need to stand on it and stand on it boldly and stop cowering in the face of opposition. We need to speak.
So Dave and Sharon, thank you so much for joining me on Politics Today as we've explored the issue of Jew hatred further. And our message to you is you're not alone. We're standing with you and your community because this is our way of thanking you for everything the Jewish community has given us. The Messiah, the prophets, the Word of God, our whole entire Western civilization is thanks to our Jewish friends. So thank you. And I want to thank you for watching this program today. We can't sit by or on the fence and allow this rise of Jew hatred to poison and intoxicate our nation. So we need to make a stand against this, and a biblical stand. So thank you for watching this edition of Politics Today.